I'm at work, do my fight, get paid, go home. There is no like big thing, oh my God, you've won a fight. It's not like something new to me. I've been doing it my whole career.
Chapter 5. Endgame. I rarely watch my old fights back. In the aftermath of a title bout, during those mad hours when everyone's celebrating in the ring and I'm normally serenading Paris or the fans with a song or two, the buzz can be big. I'm on too much of a high. Once I get back home or to the hotel, I might look at the highlights on TV or scroll to a few videos on social media, but only for a few minutes. I'm really not one for living in the past. The fight is done. Gone. I'm more about living in the now. Watching old bouts also gives me anxiety, even though I know the outcome. I'll be the bloke lifting his arms in victory at the end, but I still feel weird about it, and I'm not sure why. Isn't that one of the biggest problems with mental health issues? If everybody knew exactly what was creating the problem in the first place, the healing process would be a lot easier. It could be the emotional stress involved in replaying a time when I've been battered about the body and head. Or maybe it drops me back into the ring psychologically. I can feel myself taking the big hits again, and as I watch the images on screen, I often physically slip the punches and move my body. It's a shame I can't study my old matches more often, because the third Wilder meeting was an absolute epic. And it all began with the build-up. Until meeting me, Wilder hadn't experienced defeat, and while he wasn't intimidated during our first two contests, he must have been mentally destroyed by the result, particularly the manner of my emphatic victory in the second fight. In the aftermath of that, he was forced to accept a difficult reality for the very first time. Previously, the thought of getting absolutely battered by an opponent must have seemed like an impossibility, a fiction. Then, faced with a nightmare come true, there was only one of two options for him to take. One, accept the beating, or two, magic up an alternative, bollocks reality, one in which he'd somehow emerged a champion, because in his head he hadn't lost fairly. Wilder ended up going for option 2. But I wasn't going to let him wind me up in any way, because when it came to the type of mind games needed to dominate the headlines before a fight, I was a master. Like Professor X, the X-Men mutant with telepathic powers so intense that he could affect another person's thoughts from 250 miles away. During interviews, I have always made a point of wriggling inside the head of an experienced opponent, usually with just a few choice words, and I have psyched out reigning champs like Klitschko at weigh-ins and media events. Meanwhile, anyone hoping to have a go at me in the build-up to a title bout is plonked onto an emotional roller coaster. The ride shakes them up, corkscrews them around and chucks them into a loop-the-loop. Having been spat out at the other end, feeling totally wrecked, most of my rivals are left thinking, what's what and who's who? From that moment on, they see a different person every time they look at me, and it always freaks them out. I also get to know about a person's heart in these moments. I learn who is up for it and who isn't. I discover which fighters are ready to win and which ones are ready for a paycheck. When the time came for me to face Wilder in the ring for the third time, I knew he was there for the taking again, because he sat through our LA press conference in June, wearing a pair of sunglasses and a set of headphones. That had revealed a serious lack of self-belief. Really, what could I have possibly said to a man that was going to make him perform so badly that he had to drown me out with music? There were no such fears from me. I had rocked up in a white suit with a print design featuring my own face, plus a white baseball cap that I turned backwards. I was topless underneath. Wilder proceeded to say nothing for the entire event, other than to thank Jesus and his lawyer, and to utter another threat. Look, enough said. Time to cut off his head. And come July 24th, there will be bloodshed. When he later stepped up for the face-off and pulled away his shades, he glared. So I glared back, and we locked eyes for nearly 6 minutes in what was probably the longest stare-down in boxing history. Neither of us said a word. Wilder because he was hanging on to his vendetta, me because I didn't have to go there. I knew the 2020 victory had come about because I'd been the better fighter, but there was undoubtedly a war of wills going on. Whoever turned away first in that moment would have looked the weaker man, and for a while the whole room fell silent, apart from the clicking of cameras. Then slowly the shouting had started. I heard people calling out insults. Someone even tried to end the conference, but I was never going to look away. In the end, Wilder had blinked first. He put on his shades and walked. If he'd wanted to, I'd have happily stood there for days, just staring. "Thank you for turning up to this one-sided press conference," I said at the end. I think my desire to win in anything, even a face-off, comes from my faith. It reminds me of the attitude shown by the biblical figure David, a boy who possessed the minerals to take on the giant Goliath with nothing more than a sling and 5 stones plucked from a nearby stream. David was fearless, and I am the same. As well as being undefeatable in the ring, I have no way of knowing when I am beaten. I never feel as if I've bitten off more than I can chew, and I never say die. Wilder was discovering all of this for himself, the hard way. Every punch during Fury vs. Wilder 3 seemed to happen in shadows and camera flashes. Due to the hits I took in the fight, it's very difficult for me to piece it together, but what I can remember is that from the start I felt strong but loose as I moved around the ring. Then Wilder came at me with a series of stooping haymakers to the body, straight right-handers that connected downstairs, but I knew to keep my eyes out for a heavier shot. I'd read the script. This was a diversionary tactic. He's going over the top in a minute with a big one, I thought. Having figured out his game plan, there was really no point in me blocking the body shot, because when his right-hander to the head eventually arrived, I knew that ducking it would take some focus. I thought, I can't let him back me up like this. I caught his first few attempts early, though, glancing most of them away. Then I hit him back, bloody hard, with a searching left and a hefty right. Being aggressive with a fighter like Deontay Wilder is the only way to operate, because he has a killer instinct, in the same way that Vladimir Klitschko had a killer instinct. In order to win, I needed to hurt him, and then carry on hurting him, because there was a good chance he could knock me out if I didn't. I threw a couple of big punches in the second, wobbling his head. Then I knocked him down in the third, first bouncing him off the ropes with a powerful jab, and then slamming him with a heavy right. As he toppled to the deck like a tree snapped in half, I caught him twice more, believing the fight was already done. You're getting an early night tonight, I thought. But Wilder wasn't yet ready to go, and after a check from the ref, he was deemed fit enough to fight on. I'd been complacent, and once the bell rang out in the third and the fourth got underway, he put me to the floor, not once, but twice. The first coming from a heavy right-hander that swept me over, the second, another big punch to the top of my skull. I tumbled just as the bell was about to go, but pulled myself together to make it through the round. It was a reminder to never underestimate my opponent again. Sugar Hill sat me down in a corner. "Get back on your jab," he yelled. "Use the jab. Use the jab." Most people watching probably thought I was finished. Nobody gets knocked down twice in a round and goes on to win. But I knew the fight was still up for grabs. Don't forget, I was like David, the kid that didn't back down from a fight. I looked across the ring at Wilder. Right, you've been down in round 3, I thought. I've been down twice in round 4. We'll see now who's got the most mental toughness. Then I remembered back to our staring contest in LA. If that showdown was anything to go by, I was the one coming out on top. The following 5 rounds turned into a war of attrition, a place where I always come alive. There was no way on earth I was putting down my guns, even though the effort required to stay in the battle was exhausting. I kept working away, picking my moments for the biggest punches, inflicting damage whenever I could. At times, Wilder's legs went wobbly. He was tiring, and for a while he seemed to be barely hanging on. I got behind my jab, just as Sugar Hill suggested, and from time to time I gave out some chat, usually in the seconds after I'd clobbered him around the skull. Bang! I smiled. "Did you like that, you big dosser?" Then I bit down on my gum shield and went again. Here's the general order of events when people give up during tough times. Firstly, the head decides it's done. Then the body follows. I've learned through experience that the trick is to not let the mind fail in the first place. And during situations like the one I found myself in against Wilder, I am able to keep any negative thoughts at bay with a series of psychological techniques. The first is to remember my previous career victories, because they tell me I have it in me to win, and luckily there are a lot of them to choose from. Once the challenge has started, I then engage in an internal war of words. The first voice is always gentle. "Oh, you're tired. You can quit." Then a second, angrier voice kicks in. It winds me up and makes me mad, forcing me into a battle with my own mind. "Go on then, quit. I dare you, you little shithouse. Do it." That is usually enough to get me through. The second technique focuses on an understanding of time and pain. Quitting takes a second, but living with the hurt of failure can last a lifetime, and in those rare moments where I've given up on something minor, I have always felt awful afterwards. Shite, I think. Why have I just quit on that? Remembering back to those moments of frustration always gives me a boot up the arse, while helping me to hit my targets in whatever it was I'd been doing. There have even been times in training camps when my strength and conditioning guy has told me to do a certain type of weight or a movement until failure. I'll always give him a look. "Listen, you'll have to give me a goal, even if it's an outrageous one, because I ain't quitting. There will be no burnout and I'll be here until tomorrow morning." As far as I'm concerned, there is nothing worse than downing tools on something, and even the thought of it potentially happening annoys me. While I've never experienced defeat in my pro career, and can't even imagine it, if I do ever lose a fight to a knockout punch, a lucky shot I couldn't have protected myself against, I might be able to accept the loss. Maybe. But if I were to throw in the towel due to a broken jaw, a twisted ankle, or a split head, I couldn't stomach it. So I don't allow it to happen. I've learned that there's really no stopping the mind. Some people out there, not many, can even push way beyond the limits of what's assumed to be humanly possible, simply through self-belief. I'd like to think that I work in pretty much the same way. I won't stop to find out what my limits are. For example, I could run a marathon tomorrow without training, due to the simple reason that my brain wouldn't allow me to stop moving. I could go on to one of those brutal reality TV shows where the contestants have to survive on their mental strength and clean up, no problem. Because the mind controls everything in situations where a person has to face their breaking points. Mine would be well suited because it's as strong as concrete. But it's not just about running around like a headless chicken. Because I believe in quality over quantity. No matter what the task or challenge is, it has to be done right. It doesn't matter whether I'm training for a heavyweight championship bout or washing the car. I'll put the same level of passion and commitment into both. If it's training, I'll force my body and mind beyond the limit, over and over and over. Partly this attitude is down to my OCD, but while it helps to work hard and to never give up, there are aspects of it that are a hindrance. I'll drive myself mad over stuff I really shouldn't be getting worked up about. Like if I'm packing the shopping away at the supermarket till. The fresh meat has to go in a bag with all the other fresh meat. The cleaning stuff has to go in a bag with all the other cleaning stuff. The tinned goods need to go in the same bag too. I can't just chuck it in all together and be done with it, like most people would, because it gives me really bad anxiety. This type of mindset can be bizarre at times. If I'm cleaning the car, I'll soap it down 2 or 3 times before hosing it off. Then I'll take the chamois lever to it. I don't do half measures. Everything's got to be performed correctly, otherwise there's no point in me doing it in the first place. Deontay Wilder was about to witness my mental strength up close. I caught him again in the 10th with another big right-hander that knocked him to the canvas. For a second I put my arms up, believing the fight was done. Then I snapped out a bit, remembering my mistake from the 3rd. There's no point admiring your work against this guy. He could come out swinging again. I took a step back and assessed the state of him. If you get up, pal, I'll knock you down again, I thought. If you don't, then see you later. Wilder was wobbling, rising to his feet. There was a little fight left in him, but not much. Do what you've got to do, I told myself. And if he's going to keep coming, then keep delivering the shots. By the time the 11th round had kicked off, I knew my opponent was done, even though he had managed a little row of punches towards the close of 10. He was getting weaker and weaker. I was moving very aggressively and smacking him about with hammers. I caught him with a solid right, then another. A powerful uppercut rocked him back. I thought, if I can knock him down again, he won't be getting back up. And once I'd manhandled him a little bit, pushing him away to give myself enough space for a bigger hit, I spotted my opportunity. I caught him with a left hook and then a big right hook. I felt my knuckles sinking into the side of his head through the glove. It was like I'd pounded my fist into a block of wet clay. To Wilder, it must have felt as if all 277 pounds of me had connected with his brain, and his face shook like a plate of jelly as he went over. There was no getting up from that. Wilder was asleep before he had hit the floor, and I ran to the ropes, jumping up to face the crowd. Our epic battle was over. And he could have no excuses this time. At the end of the fight, I struggled to piece together the big events. That was partly down to the chaos on the canvas afterwards, the shouting and the celebrating. But something felt off. Everything was foggy. I couldn't remember exactly what had happened, and for a little while I didn't know what was going on. The basics were there. I was in Vegas. I'd beaten Wilder, but parts of the match seemed out of reach. There were blanks. So I kept asking my brother, Shane, a load of questions. How many times did I put him down? How many times did he knock me over? What round did the fight finish in? When I reached around to the back of my skull, I felt a lump forming, a war wound from one of the blows Wilder had managed to glance across my head. My heart sank. You never knew what those lumps could be, especially when you'd been clumped by a bloke of Wilder's size. Those pummeling bangs to the skull, in a fight that had nearly lasted the distance, would leave a serious mark. Was I going to suffer from brain swelling? I'd heard horror stories of fighters having to go through surgery to sort a serious head injury. I also knew of boxers that had been left brain injured. After the canvas had been cleared, I went to see the doctor. "Check me over quickly," I said. The doc ran a series of tests. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, everything's fine. You've got some swelling on the head, but there's no proper damage. You're okay." I knew I'd been in a war, so I couldn't imagine how Wilder must have felt, seeing as he'd also been punched in the head repeatedly. Before seeing the doctor, I'd walked over to chat. It was time to let bygones be bygones. We'd had a fantastic fight after all, but when I approached him, there was nothing in his reaction that suggested a truce was coming. Wilder didn't want to talk. "I don't respect you," he said. In his mind, the fight was still personal. "That's okay. It's your loss," I said, "and you're a sore loser." With hindsight, it might not have been the best time to approach Wilder. He had just been knocked unconscious, so there's a chance he might have been delirious. But also, the fact that he'd threatened to kill me in the build-up had probably altered his emotional focus. I wasn't going to pay too much attention to his words. I was continuing on my own path as always. That night we went to the high-end Hakkasan nightclub in Vegas and burned through a ton of money in an hour, buying drinks for everybody. My head felt fixed right up after that.
It only lasts for a minute or so, this ecstasy feeling of, oh, I've done it. But even me, like, I look at it for what it really is. Like, I've done my thing that I had to do, right? Off back home now. Daddy goes home. I'm at work, do my fight, get paid, go home. But when I've always aimed for the stars and anything less was a failure, then this was always expected. I was always expected, in my mind, my expectations was either be the best or nothing. There was no second place or third or 10th. It was always first, be the best or don't do it at all. And through my expectations, that was it. There was never ever going to be, oh, I might be ranked in the heavyweight top 10. It was either I'm going to be the best or I'm not. Forget about it.
Do you bring that to everything you do?
Not really. No? Most things, in life, most things, but not everything. But I don't really do a lot. What do I do? Go to the gym and back. My life is Groundhog Day. You've seen the movie Groundhog, haven't you? Well, that's me. That's my life. I can tell you what I'm doing every single day of my life.
Yeah.
Every hour, every day. Obviously, there's bits of tours and things in between. But while I'm not doing that, while I'm in my normal routine life, I'll get up every morning at 7 a.m. I get the kids up, dressed, fed, off to school, followed by a run, followed by breakfast, followed by odd jobs around the house, pay some bills, take rubbish to the tip, that sort of stuff, pick the kids up from school, bring them back, let them play out, whatever. Go to the gym at 4, train for 2 hours, shower up, come back, get me tea, relax, bed, early night for the next day. I'm going to say, well, how are you excited about going to bed at 8:30 at night, 9 o'clock, and then getting up the next morning at 7 doing exactly the same thing? Well, that's what makes me tick. Like, I enjoy getting an early night, and I enjoy getting up early and doing exactly the same thing every day, regimented, routine. If you're Mr. Nice Guy, you can have 50 wins in a row, no one gives a shit, because you're just another bare bum in the shower. But once you've captured the imagination of people, then you can let them know who you really are. And that's exactly what happened in the second coming.
Chapter 6. The U-Turn. Remember earlier when I said that everyone usually has a plan until they've been punched in the gob? Well, here comes the hit. As the dust settled on the Wilder fight, it felt like the time for me to hang up my gloves had finally arrived. Again. I was healthy, and if I walked away I'd have zero regrets, knowing in my heart of hearts that I'd given everything to the sport. The good time vibes would be cranked up even higher if I retired without a loss to become the only living member in an elite club featuring 2 people, Rocky Marciano and myself, the undefeated heavyweight champions of the world. To me, that was more rewarding than any belt or knockout. And then, bang, Frank Warren approached me with the opportunity to fight at Wembley Stadium in April 2022. I took a breath. The pros of accepting the bout were easy to figure out. For starters, it was bound to be an epic battle on home soil. But it would also mark my first appearance in the UK for nearly 4 years, the last being my comeback match against Francesco Pianetta in Belfast in 2018. Since the beginning of 2020, the country had been locked down, on and off, due to the coronavirus pandemic. And after all that time, with the hardship and pain that came with it, England seemed to be peeling itself off the canvas for another go-around. A sporting event at the National Stadium, packed with tens of thousands of boxing fans, would only add to the idea that we were healing as a nation. But I was pushing my luck, because being able to consider retirement at the age of 33 was incredible, a gift, and the work required to even reach that point had been backbreaking, as it would have been for any combat athlete in my position. Yeah, most elite-level fighters are millionaires, but there is a simple truth to our lives. We graft so bloody hard for our money. This isn't exactly news. I was warned about the hardships of becoming a pro boxer as a kid, having been selected to represent England at amateur level, and while training abroad one time, a coach had gathered all the lads around for a pep talk. The chat was revealing. "Look, the road's going to be long," he said, "and you'll have to sacrifice things you never thought you'd even dream of sacrificing to get to where you want to be. Even then, 80% of you won't make it." But I had made it. I was in a place where the sacrifices could stop. I only had to say so. And yet, here I was, considering another fight for another purse, in another throw of the mortality dice. And all at the moment where I'd emotionally accepted my exit from boxing. So of course, I said yes. First of all, I told Paris, "I've got to fight again." "Why? You said you weren't going to do this," she said. I know, but I owe the fans one more fight." She pushed back. "You told me it was over. And if you take this fight, then what? There's always going to be one more, isn't there?" "But what about all the people who haven't been able to see me fight live in the last 4 years?" I said. "All the people that stayed up until 4 in the morning to watch me fight in America? What about all the people that would love to see me live one last time?" We got into it a little bit. There was no denying that Wembley was a showcase venue, an opportunity to bow out in style. Paris, by going out this way, I'll be giving the UK's boxing fans what they want. The return of the mag. The boys are back in town, me, going out with a massive bang. It will be the cherry on a fantastic cake. How could it not be? Throughout my career, the fans have been absolutely crazy. They've travelled the world with me, standing by my side for a long, long time, even when the chips were down. I've seen them packing into the seats at the Staples Center in Los Angeles and Madison Square Garden in New York, some of the biggest boxing venues in the world. The scenes for the Fury v Wilder trilogy had been crazy too. But that's because our nation produced the best fans in the world. The loudest, the drunkest, the rowdiest. Whether it's football, rugby or boxing, we're known for out-singing anyone, and my London showdown was bound to be a banging night out. Guaranteed. A day on the lash with friends, a few beers at Wembley, and then a massive session afterwards to celebrate. Could it get any better for a boxing fan? Paris. I want them to have a massive get-together in their own back garden, I said, rather than them saying goodbye on the other side of the planet. In the end, she came around. Okay, you're right. You do have to fight again. Everything was sorted. Boxing was about to have the mother of all parties. While the Wembley showdown presented an incredible opportunity to go out in style, there was still plenty to think about. The first thing being my opponent. The WBC president, Maurizio Suleiman, had made it known that any mandatory title defence would have to take place against Dillian Whyte, and the bloke was a worthy challenger. At 6'4" and 18 stone, the then 33-year-old, he'd be 34 at the time of the fight, with only 2 losses on his record, one defeat to Anthony Joshua in 2015 and another to Alexander Povetkin in 2020, had knocked out some pretty solid fighters on his way to becoming a British champion. For a time, Whyte had even made it to the number 1 ranked WBC contender position in the heavyweight division. Here was a dude I was going to have to take very seriously indeed. But I take all my opponents seriously. Always. I'm certainly not in the habit of underestimating a highly trained heavyweight title fighter, because everyone in my category carries the potential to come at me really hard with a knockout punch. Not that I ever visualise it before a fight. Just thinking about getting sent to the canvas invites the possibility of it actually happening. So it is an image I blank from my head, in much the same way that a weightlifter erases doubt before attempting a personal best. To step up to the bar while thinking, I can't lift this, well, that's only going to end in disaster, isn't it? As I've said before, the mind is the most powerful resource on the planet and capable of incredible feats. So I was rocking up to Wembley with only one thought. I'm knocking this fella out. Interestingly, Whyte and I share a little history. After I'd won the British, Irish, WBO Intercontinental and Commonwealth Heavyweight Championships, and he was taking names as an emerging boxer, I invited him into my training camps to spar. This was an invitation I was committed to, because as a youngster I wasn't treated so well when stepping into the worlds of 1 or 2 pro fighters. After a few bad experiences, I made it a point to look after everyone I employed, especially sparring partners, who are an integral part of my training group, like eggs in a cake, whisked in. From the minute they arrive, I want them to feel like a fully fledged member of the Fury team with total access to the 5-star facilities, plus money for good food and a car to use. A nice one, not a banger. They are also given 24/7 access to chefs, massage therapists, physios and strength and conditioning trainers. Once the work is done, every single one of those sparring partners wants to return for the next fight. Training camps are a grueling business, and I take care not to wear anybody out. I want my sparring opponents to feel fresh all the time, because it guarantees a better session. But my style of working is very different to that of a lot of boxers, some of whom like smashing their guys to bits. Instead, I bring 3 or 4 blokes into the camp, and none of them are allowed to spar for more than 3 rounds at a time. Once their 9 minutes are done, I'll bring the next one in, even if the first fighter has been buzzing about the ring, seemingly ready for more. By doing so, I spend my entire sessions warring with a fast, sharp guy, which makes it so much easier to pick apart a tiring opponent when the real fight comes around. For a while, Whyte had been a part of that setup, and I'd brought him in as far back as 2012 after he'd been suspended. When he arrived, he was treated like every sparring partner I'd invited into the camp. We ate the same, we drank the same, and we trained the same. And I think we initially got along because at the time we both had similar goals. More than anything, Whyte had ambition to burn, just like me. After that, I took him under my wing for a bit because I liked him, and he was an all-round decent fella who sometimes lent on me for fighting tips. And if ever an opponent made Whyte's life difficult early on in his career, which wasn't often, I sent a supportive note to keep him going. Chin up, pal. This is what happens. It's part and parcel of boxing. We ended up hanging out away from training, and I remember the pair of us sparring together in 2013. The camp was in a Dutch town close to the Belgian border, and every now and then we'd head into Antwerp and wander from bar to bar. Me dressed in a full-on fur coat, white in a leather jacket. I looked like a pimp. He looked like a debt collector. But despite our past friendship, it would be me coming to collect at Wembley, because I had his number, like I had everyone's number. And he bloody well knew it. As with my previous fights, the Wembley Showdown was being organised by my promoter, Frank Warren. A powerful figure with over 40 years of experience, Frank has looked after the likes of Ricky Hatton, Amir Khan, Frank Bruno and Chris Eubank. In fact, he's been in the business for so long that the things Frank doesn't know about boxing probably aren't worth knowing in the first place. I chose him as my promoter while preparing to fight again in 2018, even though I must have looked like a bad bet. At the time, I was still massively overweight, coming in at around 26 or 27 stone, having been away from boxing for around 1,000 days. Despite the mess I was clearly still in, Frank reckoned he could secure me a series of big fights and even bigger paydays. Well, if you believe in this, I said, gesturing to my body, you must believe in magic. From then on, Frank had a new nickname, the Magic Man, and he promoted those comeback bouts against the Albanian Sefer Seferi and Francesco Pianetta of Germany. This wasn't my first experience of working with Frank. I'd initially met him in 2014, having signed a deal with his TV channel, Box Nation. From there I fought Joey Abel and defeated Frank's fighter Derek Chisora during our second fight. But beyond our work together, I never had much involvement with Frank, and didn't know a lot about him. I still don't. The only thing I care about is the fact that he's a boxing promoter, and a big-time one at that. I couldn't tell you whether he whips up an amazing omelette, or if he has some other unknown talents, because we don't talk that way. Frank Warren is the promoter, and I am the fighter. His job is to put the fights on. Mine is to win them. And the only time he ever calls me up is if there is a deal to be discussed. We are simply business, baby. Frank had set the white fight for 23rd of April, and when Wembley Stadium was officially announced as the venue, a lot of people, who should have known better, assumed it was a joke. Around 90,000 tickets were set to go on sale, and at first I heard all the usual negative bollocks doing the rounds about how the seats wouldn't be sold. Why doesn't Tyson Fury do a normal venue? We've just had a pandemic, no one will want to see this, blah blah blah. But when the box office opened, 85,000 tickets flew out in around 3 hours, and Frank had to request permission so he could sell even more. In the end, we shifted 94,000, which gave Fury vs. White a post-war record for a boxing match. My gut feeling had been spot on. After a year of lockdowns, the country was in desperate need of a big night out. I can't understand why people were surprised. I've been a salesman all my life, starting from when I was a kid working in the car trade. More than anything, I know how to drum up interest with the tyre kickers and the undecided. That means, when it comes to boxing, I understand what it takes to sell an event to anyone that might be sitting on the fence. I suppose in many ways, I haven't actually needed a promoter during my career. Don't misread me. I'm not taking anything away from Frank Warren, but it's his job to organise the show, the logistics and the TV rights. The rest I do with press conferences and PR stunts, going all the way back to my public appearances before the Klitschko fight, when I rocked up in a Batman costume. People might think that promoters have done wonders for me during my career. I'd argue that it was me doing wonders for them. I am a dream client. Given a way in which I both fight and present myself, a priest with zero understanding of boxing could have promoted Fury vs. White, and still sold out the place in a day or two. While the fight being held at Wembley Stadium was undeniably a big deal, the venue didn't hold a special or sentimental spot in my heart, not like some places do. While mapping out my fighting career as a young kid, the National Stadium hadn't been on any of the wish lists. I'm a Man United fan, so I've always quite fancied appearing at Old Trafford. Apart from that, I've lived out my boxing dreams, fighting in the clubs and arenas I saw on TV as a kid. One of those is York Hall in Bethnal Green, East London. A proper place with a proper history, even though at the time I fought there it was a dingy and derelict dump with tiny changing rooms. Anyone who is anyone has boxed there, and I've experienced it a couple of times. Once in the ABA finals as a teenager, and then when I was working my way up in the pro game. People from all over the world know about York Hall. It is considered a mecca for UK boxing. Another venue I'd always dreamed of fighting in was Madison Square Garden, New York. Me dishing out big hits under the spotlight. I made it there in 2013, having beaten Steve Cunningham during my first ever pro appearance in the US, and when I knocked him out in the 7th round, my ambition soared. This is it now. I can't lose. I'll become world champion, because if you can do the business in New York, the world is your oyster. The other venue my younger self had always fantasised about fighting in was the Staples Center in LA, where I'd first taken on Wilder. It was everything I'd hoped it would be. The place was packed, everyone going crazy. Having ticked off those dream locations earlier on in my career, I was in good shape for a fight the size of Wembley Stadium. There was no stress about the scale and expectations. I was never a person to get rattled by stage fright anyway, and at no point did the prestige of the event bother me. I wasn't one to freak out and think, oh my God, I'm about to fight in front of 94,000 people, how will I cope? As long as I trained and prepared in the right way, I was going to be more than okay. And in many ways, I was a bit like a school kid walking into exam season, knowing the revision had been nailed. Not that I would know what that was like. I was also dripping in confidence at that time, which, as you should know by now, is a strength of mine. Supreme self-belief is vital to win, and it's not something that can easily be manufactured. I've noticed it oozing from some sports stars, and I've seen it fading away in others. The Manchester United and Real Madrid legend Cristiano Ronaldo is a classic example of this idea, especially when he was in his prime. If he ever stepped up to take a free kick, he looked like a dead cert to succeed. As I prepared myself for the biggest sporting event of the year, I was going to be like Ronaldo, focused and ready to work, though I wasn't going to overdo it. I didn't want to train so excessively that some last ounce of energy or a crucial punch was left behind in the gym. Ultimately, I was there to put on a show. Even if the fight became a struggle, I'd still find a way to beat White. So I stepped into my training camp, ready to go, willing to work, desperate to perform.
The fact of the greatest comeback story in any sport ever, the fact that I'd come back from brink of defeat, suicide, mental health struggle, losing 10 stone in weight, losing all my belts, never losing a fight in the ring, gone from the most hated person on the planet to one of the most loved in sports. So it was just a real engaging story. And it captured the imagination of the general public, because it was the average person in the street suffers with the same stuff I do. The mental health problems. The average person in the street you might see me in the pub, you might, whatever. I'm not one of those like superheroes that's untouchable. I'm just an average fat, chubby guy, bald-headed, local lad you might see in a boozer. So probably that's appealing too. In the first career, it wasn't like I couldn't sell out 94,000 tickets at Wembley. The second career has been much, much better for me. Yeah. That's been the pinnacle of it. The second chance has been a lot more fulfilling than the first time round. No, I didn't learn a lot of lessons. I had to do what I had to do to become famous and popular, to get the big shots at world titles. And I set out to be the most controversial, charismatic champion since Muhammad Ali, and I definitely achieved it, for sure. So the first career was being outspoken and being brash and arrogant, just so they would know who I was. So I did 3 weeks in England and a week over there and done, straight in. So very, very, very ill prepared for the fight.
Chapter 7. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. At the beginning of December 2021, I started early with an 8-week program in which I jogged every morning and trained every evening. I made sure to cut back on the fish and chips too. At that point, I was already in better shape than I had been during the chaotic build-up to Fury vs Wilder 3, and I even worked through Christmas, which helped to keep the black dog of depression on a leash. I've noticed that my mental health issues sometimes build up during the festive season, when it feels like Groundhog Day for around a fortnight and it becomes hard to tell Sunday from any other day. In those disorientating moments, my weights, bags, and the pounding of my trainers on the pavement keep me strong. By February, Sugar Hill had arrived for the training camp I was operating out of my Morecambe gym. At the same time, I moved into another house to avoid the distractions that a 6-strong battalion of kids could bring. From there, my workload went into overdrive, and the target was clear to everyone. Get me to the fight injury-free, then wind me up and watch me go. I wanted to test myself to the max throughout, so we brought in a group of fearsome sparring partners, young fighters, all undefeated, each one with a point to prove. There was the up-and-coming heavyweight, David Adeleye, who had been with me during my last 3 camps. Martin Bicoli was a 6'6", 19-stone beast and had it in him to push me really hard. And finally, Jarrell Miller was a strong guy Sugar Hill had invited from America. We sparred 4 times a week, every week, the fighters rolling in and out of the ring over 10-round sessions. At first I felt up against it, but with time came strength, and I grew into the agony. I really didn't have a problem with hurting, not when I was preparing for the fight. It didn't feel like proper suffering either, because I was being helped through my sessions by a team of coaches, nutritionists and massage therapists. My body was definitely taking a battering though, especially when I was getting pounded in the stomach with a medicine ball. But as far as I was concerned, nought that came easily was worth having. Sacrificing my personal comfort to defend a world title felt meaningful. There was also a little pain, thanks to the series of injuries I'd picked up over the years. I shrugged them off, knowing that hurt was part and parcel of being in camp. The main thing bothering me was the fallout from 2 operations in October 2021, when I'd gone under the knife to treat a case of tennis elbow and bone spurs. At first, the diagnosis was that I'd developed arthritis in the elbow. Then a specialist in LA spotted some bone fragments floating around, and they were later removed through surgery. The joint was then cleaned up, and my mobility returned after a series of injections had reduced the swelling, but only to around 70%. I still couldn't straighten my arm fully, and there were only a few months to go until the white fight. But that didn't stop me from hitting personal bests on the deadlift and bench press like a Titan. Reassuringly, my reflexes were still sharp, despite those injuries, which was good news, because body movement and quick feet have always been a major part of my game. Yeah, I can hit a bloke into next week, but I'm also a dancer on the canvas, and I've developed the healthy habit of dodging punches, whereas some boxers rely solely on power. That is usually the last thing to go in a heavyweight boxer's armoury, which is why George Foreman was winning and retaining titles up until the age of 48. He always relied on brute force rather than agility. That meant his effectiveness wasn't diminished as he aged. I was 33 at the time, in the prime of my life, and at the peak age range for a heavyweight. Fighters in my category are most effective in their late 20s and typically go on for another 7 to 10 years. Lighter fighters mature faster, but they decline faster too, and are often done by their early 30s. I can probably expect a different career trajectory to him, given my assets. As I was preparing for Wilder during camp, I reflected more on my unusual style and my unusual body type as a boxer. One early fight in particular showcased my natural skills and glitches to the world, and that was my victory over Derek Chisora in 2011. The venue was London's Wembley Arena, but the attention on me had felt so much bigger because the contest was being screened live on Channel 5. This was set to be the first live bout on terrestrial telly in ages, and lots of boxing fans seemed to be making a big deal out of it. In the end, an estimated audience of 2.9 million viewers tuned in to watch, though it helped that I'd done a good job of hyping up the contest beforehand. When the fight kicked off, Chisora rocked me with some big hits in rounds 2 and 3, but I steadied myself before finding my way back into the contest. One of the commentators went crazy. "This guy has got so many flaws, but he's so watchable and so lovable," he shouted. That was because I didn't look like a heavyweight boxer. I was more like a bloke from the boozer than a ripped athlete. I went on to win the contest by a unanimous decision to take the British and Commonwealth titles. By 2022, I had a strong support team around me in training camp. At that stage, Sugar Hill, with his positive energy and incredible boxing knowledge, was a part of the furniture. But in the short time we'd been working together, he had transformed. When we first met before Fury vs. Wilder 2, he was quiet and shy. But having hung around the Gypsy King crowd for a while, he was morphing into an absolute animal. In the gym, he sang, he danced, and he cracked jokes. Bollocks, I thought. I've created a monster. I loved it when people grew in that way. Sugar Hill had entered my world, and having seen how I lived and trained close up, he'd gathered an understanding of how I worked, and the sacrifices I was making in order to succeed. With that info, he was able to tap into my personality, and he knew how to get me going. Luckily for him, I was a lunatic in training, raring to go, and always set to 125%. It wasn't like he had to fire me up that often. It's one of the reasons why he referred to me as the big dog. I usually arrived at work, ready to battle. The other key player in the group was my nutritionist, the former US Marine and MMA fighter George Lockhart. George is a big man of faith and carries a serious reputation, having fed the likes of Conor McGregor. He is also one of my best friends in the world and is an unbelievable chef who knows exactly what I need to eat and when. We started working together in 2018 and his influence was a game changer. My nutrition plan went from being wildly rubbish to a healthy, mainly, 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day, as George worked to keep me on track for whatever fight was coming next. Before long, his positive influence was a habitual part of my daily life, and eating well became something I did without thinking, like putting my shoes on to leave the house. During the comeback trail, I shifted 30 pounds in 30 days. Have that, Davina McCall. The other thing about George is that he has a talent for reading my moods, even when I'm training hard, my head down. That is a real skill, because complaining isn't my thing. I don't like telling people when I'm tired or groggy. During that camp, there were days when I would walk into the gym feeling terrible, but George usually noticed. Then he'd prod me with questions. How you doing today? I'd shrug. I'm great. An eyebrow would shoot up. Sure? Yeah. But George knew. He always knew. I get that you feel great all the time, and you're going to push it no matter what. But are you tired? Sore? Leggy? Once I told him how I really was, George would whip up a burrito packed with eggs, chicken and breakfast potatoes. That usually put me right. Or maybe he'd make a poke bowl with cauliflower rice. Another thing that went down a treat was a hill of fruit, Greek yogurt and flax seeds. So, as for the myth perpetuated by Rocky Balboa about getting up at 5 a.m, downing a pint of raw eggs and going for a run, that couldn't have been farther away from my reality. I was eating like a king. You might have a misconception about boxing training camps, that they're a glamorous place to be, all glitz, glamour and flashing lights. But that's bollocks. There are no rainbows or unicorns. Training camps can be boring places. To most people, the work would probably seem dull, painful and repetitive, though that's what I loved about it. And through March and April, I ran through an identical set of drills and exercises, day after day, again and again, over and over, only breaking to eat the same lunch as yesterday, or the breakfast I'd have tomorrow. For a comparison, imagine a school where they only teach 3 subjects. In my case, I was taking exams in exercise, sleeping and diet, all while a sparring partner smashed my body to bits. So here's a typical day from the training camp life of Tyson Fury. I am up at 6:30 a.m, no excuses. I wash, brush my teeth, get dressed and head downstairs. I am usually done with breakfast by around 7 or 7:30, and after getting my stuff together, I am out of the door, in the car, and walking through into the gym by 9. Following a morning of work, I break for lunch and rest up. Then I am back in the afternoon to spar. Training finished, I drive home, have my tea and try to get in bed by 9. On Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, I box, sometimes bag work, and I spar 3 or 4 times a week. On alternate days, I push myself through strength and conditioning work. Maybe I go for a run. On Sundays I rest and visit the family. Monday to Sunday, rinse, repeat. Bosh. This is a way of working I've grown accustomed to over a 20-year life in the game. When I first started my professional career in 2008, my late Uncle Huey trained me. Rather than moving into a fancy gym with all the mod cons, we worked out of a big shed with a barely held together boxing ring. The loose flooring caused me to stumble from time to time, but at least the commute was short. I was living in a caravan next door at the time, and I found comfort in an environment where the equipment was old and worn. Rough and ready was more my thing. I liked the spit and sawdust approach, and I wasn't the kind of fighter that needed to be wired up to a computer to feel prepared, or plugged into the electric grid like a robot. That's because there is nothing technical about smashing another dude's face in, and because the basic needs of humans haven't evolved in millennia. From the beginning of time, we've done exactly the same thing as a species on the daily. We get up, we provide, we look after our families, we eat, drink, and sleep. Any of the other crap that happens in between is a personal preference. The concept of fighting is pretty much the same. It hasn't evolved because it doesn't need to, and really, when you strip everything away, all you are left with is two people trying to punch each other for the entertainment of others. It was like that for the very first boxing match thousands of years ago. It's no different today. That hasn't stopped some people from trying to overcomplicate the process with all the bells and whistles. Yoga? That's nonsense. Stretching doesn't work for me. Ice baths? I've had one or two, but they don't make a penny's worth of difference. The same goes for vegetables. Even since George has been in my camp, I don't eat a lot of them. I'm approaching my mid-30s, so I don't want to eat my greens I don't have to. I can also remember someone once warning me off of diet pop. I thought, what a load of shite, and sank between 10 and 20 a day. My attitude is that I can do what I want, because it isn't holding me back from being the world champion. Really, when it comes to training, there are 3 things for me to focus on. 1. Running. 2. Sparring. 3. The heavy bag. Forget the stretching, the computer analysis and all that fancy bollocks. Because as Andy Ruiz Jr. proved when he defeated Anthony Joshua in 2019, after coming in as fat as a pig, by the way, it's not about the sports science or the technology. If it had been, Joshua would have easily won. I experienced the same thing in my career too, when I fought Klitschko. The Ukrainian had surrounded himself with doctors, weightlifters, sports geeks and top chefs, while my training camp was running out of a tin shed in a muddy field in Liverpool, and I slept in a caravan. I still lost 6 stone in the build-up to give him a hiding. Throughout my career, a number of trainers have tried to stick heart rate monitors to my chest so I could be assessed during sparring sessions. My response? Suck my balls, because the numbers on your computer screen are going to mean sod all when I hit the other bloke in the temple and his legs go all wobbly. Others have encouraged me to operate in the red zone, which is where an athlete uses 90 to 100% of their maximum heart rate and everything hurts. I've hated that too. It is knackering, and whenever a coach has tried to push me with numbers and percentages, I've pushed back. I'm killing myself here, I'd say. I am in the red zone. But you're not. The machine says you've got to keep working. Screw what that machine says, I'd shout. I'm fit as. 8 weeks later, having trained without the high-tech nonsense, I would get into the ring and blitz my opponent. Then, having left the arena victorious, I often noticed that nobody wanted to argue the toss about graphs and charts. Nobody discussed the red zone either. They only wanted to talk about the fight. Funny that. When I'm actually working, everything has to be done just right. I'm what you'd call a perfectionist. Partly this is down to the fact that I suffer from OCD and can't stand not having everything in the right place. Though it's under control now, the issue was pretty bad for a while. Bad in that I would get pissed off if the heaters in my car weren't set to the same level. Bad that if the volume on my radio or TV wasn't set to an even number, I would feel weird. Not doing those things could at times create anxiety for me. But the upside of my OCD is that if you give me a routine, I can potentially live with it forever, and I'm driven to do things correctly. It makes me a very quick learner, and once I'm shown something, it doesn't need repeating. That mindset is one of the reasons why I could never do Sugar Hill's job, or George's for that matter. Everything has to be performed exactly the way I like it. No excuses. I also have zero patience. I don't want something done next week, next month, or even next year. It has to be today or forget about it. Throughout my career, people have always said to me, "Why are you in a rush? You want everything yesterday." They have told me to wait before fighting certain people, like Deontay Wilder, but I've pressed ahead anyway. My response has usually been to tell them, I believe in striking while the iron's hot. I don't want to wait 10 years for something to happen. I want it now. I believe that the winning attitude needs a person to be in the moment, like so many other things. But that isn't the right approach for a coach, and the best ones display both patience and urgency. Also, as a trainer, there is every chance I would expect my fighters to be like me. A boxer under my tutelage would have to hit like me, dodge punches like me, and take pain like me. They would have to hate the thought of losing like me, and love the sensation of proving people wrong like me. Given that everyone, of course, is different, I probably wouldn't be flexible enough in my approach to be a coach. Still, there have had to be trade-offs with my obsessive nature when it comes to performance and routine, and I've often found the best balance in the nearest pub. Yeah, the training camp environment is good for me. With a siege mentality, I thrive because I know exactly when I am training, when I am eating, and when I am sleeping for 3 months, but I'm not going to live like a monk. I like to nip out and have a couple of pints every now and then, because it helps to sort my head before a big fight. Besides, I've heard the hops are good for recovery. Don't get me wrong, I never smash it or have a huge party. I've just learned that it's a lot harder to get the best out of me when I'm not having fun. What makes a good boxer is a strong work-life balance. They have to play well too. If a fighter doesn't have the occasional cigar after a fight, doesn't go out for a few pints with the lads, or doesn't have a partner, they'll probably lose sight of what's important. Also, when those moments in life do come around, like when they meet the one, or encounter a period in their life when they want to blow off steam, they won't be able to handle it because it's such an alien experience. Everything feels too new. I'm not suggesting that pro boxers should go out every night and get hammered. I'm simply saying there's no harm in relaxing from time to time. Ours is a sport where if you don't enjoy life, you won't get the best out of yourself. There have even been 1 or 2 training camps where I haven't prepared as well as I should have done. The most memorable of these was when I fought a 12-round contest against an opponent I won't name. The stakes were fairly big at the time, but that didn't stop me from having a drink during the build-up, even though the guy I was fighting had a solid record. The night before our press conference, I went out until 4 in the morning. I then rocked up hungover and told my opponent what I was going to do to him. I stuck to my word too, knocking the dosser out cold when the contest took place. That is the story of my life. There are plenty of fighters that are fitter than me. They can run faster and even punch harder than me. They just can't fight or live like me. And that is their undoing.
As soon as the baby got well enough, said, right, she can leave on Tuesday, I left the hospital, went straight into training camp for Wilder 3, which left me around about 4 weeks and 5 days, just under 5 weeks training. And I had to cross the Atlantic and go to the west coast of America, which is an 8 hours time difference. Yeah. It takes a week to recover for a sportsman. So I took it down to 3.5 weeks. So I did 3 weeks in England and a week over there and done, straight in. So very, very, very ill prepared for the fight.
Could you have postponed?
I could have done, but I'd already had just under 2 years out the ring due to COVID, 22 months out. So I thought, well, you know what, fuck it. I'm not postponing again. It's going to be 3 years in a minute. This is it. It's either do or die now. And I went over there with the attitude that if this baby can get out of this hospital and get back well again and recover from death, then I can go over there and beat this useless dosser, a man I've already beaten twice before. And Wilder had a good camp and he came out firing on all cylinders. It was definitely worthy of any trilogy in the history of boxing for sure. Yeah. It was an up and down roller coaster battle of two champions of the sport at the best peak. It was only a matter of time in that 11th round. He'd done well. His corners maybe should have chucked the towel in 5 rounds before, stopped him getting a battering. But they let him get it because, you know, all this cliche in boxing, let me go out on my shield and all that. It's really up to the corner to chuck that towel in and to save that fighter. When they're not winning, they're getting lumps knocked off them with big men. then they should have stopped that fight 4 or 5 rounds before. And I remember thinking, right, there was no doubt in my mind I wasn't knocking him out cold in that fight. Not a doubt. And I knew it was happening in round 11. I could feel it coming. He was getting weaker and weaker, and he was hitting him more often. I was moving very aggressively with hammers. And I just remember catching him with the right hand, felt it sink right into the side of his head. All the knuckles landed, bang. And I just hit the floor. He was asleep before he hit the floor. Hit it like an old oak tree. And just ran away celebrating. And that was it. But fair play to Wilder, who tried to get up as well.
No one's ever knocked you out? Not going professionally, I mean kind of in training or amateur?
The Anita sisters knocked me out twice. Yeah. I had an operation on my right arm when I was a kid, and I had an operation on my left arm in October of 2021. So yeah, I've been knocked out twice by the doctors. I almost got KO'd for good with depression, but I overcame that.